Dr. Keith again, talking about inflammation. This is for third age wisdom. To live long, live well, we need to beat inflammation, and that means you need to understand inflammation and where it's coming from. Now, one of the major inflammatory sources in 21st century environment is toxic heavy metals. Now, when I say that, most people would think straight away of mercury, which is unquestionably an extremely toxic substance. It's very bad news. We don't want it in our bodies at all. We don't even want it in our environment, really. But don't forget lead. Lead is very poisonous, very inflammatory, it damages nervous tissue. It's appallingly bad for young kids. And yet there's plenty of it in the environment. It comes from old paints, it comes from dust on the roadside. Remember the days when we used to add lead as an anti-knock agent into gasoline or petrol? And old construction sites where there's different sorts of lead in the fabric and structure of the thing, piping and things like that. So lead can be very common in the environment, and very few people have zero. I don't think I know of anybody, I wouldn't believe it if somebody said they had zero lead. But listen, let me tell you one important thing, which is I learned from Dr. Gary Gordon years ago. He pointed out a paper from Harvard that the amount of lead in your bones is probably the #1 marker for how fast you're going to die. We do not want lead in our bodies. So mercury, lead, both very inflammatory and very toxic. So what do you think is the #1 problem? Well, I'm going to surprise you by saying it's arsenic. We're overloaded with arsenic. Now, I don't mean that your spouse is trying to poison you to collect the insurance. I mean, we voluntarily take in arsenic without realizing it. There's a substance called roxarsone, which is a derivative of arsenic, and it's used by poultry farmers to make their chickens bigger and fatter and, make more money, but at the expense of our health. So we have chickens that go pooping lots of arsenic-rich foodstuffs with roxarsone in it. And then we use that as a fertilizer. We put it on our crops, that we then grow the crops and eat the food, complete with the arsenic. And if that wasn't bad enough, the rain and weather conditions will degrade and degenerate the roxarsone back into pure inorganic arsenic anyway. So a lot of us have clinical levels of arsenic in our bodies. This is not good. Now, there are other chemicals that are also inflammatory, toxic. We call them heavy metals because, one of them is aluminium, which of course is a very lightweight metal. But before I go on to aluminium, there's things like cadmium, chromium. Hexavalent chromium is a special form of chromium. That was the poison, the toxin in the Erin Brockovich story. I don't know if you saw that movie with Julia Roberts. But anyway, that's what all the sickness and disease in the surrounding community was about. So I mentioned aluminium. A lot of us are in a state of toxic overload with aluminium and what that means. The reason, of course, is that we meet it in the kitchen. Aluminium foil, aluminium cook pots, aluminium utensils. It gets into the food, we swallow it, and it gets into our system. And aluminium, the Americans say aluminum, of course, but its correct name is aluminium. We don't say sodium and potassium. We say potassium, sodium, aluminium. Thank you very much. Anyway, aluminium is highly inflammatory. It's been implicated in Crohn's disease, IBD, colitis, and certainly aging neurological degenerations. It's been somewhat implicated as a probable factor in the cause of Alzheimer's disease and for that children's degenerative disorder, autism spectrum disorder. So aluminium is very bad news. We want to get it out of our system. In fact, we want to get all of these metals out of our system as far as we can. To do that there are two ways to do it. One is called depuration, where you simply keep washing through clean, non-metallic fluids through our body. That's great if you can do it, but it means every kind of soda, it puts back some of the aluminium, so you need to be very careful how you go about that. A more positive method is what we call chelation. It comes from the word crab claw, chela, where it grabs the metal and then you excrete it, typically through the intestine. Parsley and apple pectin are very mild chelators, but might be worth including them in your diet. A little bit stronger is chlorella, the algae. Chlorella is quite a good chelating agent. But you need to go, if you've got a big problem, you need to go something a bit stronger. EDTA, this is generally recognized as safe by the FDA. It's a food additive, so it's not going to hurt you. And will take out certain of the heavy metals. Unfortunately, it's not very good at removing mercury, but it's of some use to you. If it reaches a certain pitch, then you're going to have to go and see a specialist who knows how to do intravenous chelation. But there is one other product that I can suggest to you. It's produced by Dr. Chris Shade. In fact, we sell it, I sell it myself via my Dr. Keith's own site, supplement site. Go there and get yourself some. Anyway, it's called Push Catch. Push is the chelation idea, you know, pushing the heavy metal poison out of your bloodstream, out of your system. As I said, most of it goes into the intestine, where there's a compound then that will catch it. So that's the catch part, push and then catch, so that it's not reabsorbed. Otherwise, typically with chelation, you find that you're reabsorbing the metals almost as fast as you're excreting them. Why is that? Well, they're inflammatory. So when it goes into your gut, it will inflame the gut, which then becomes leaky gut, which then tends to reabsorb all these poisonous metallic ions and things. Really not very good. So we need to have a good strategy for this. As always, avoiding it completely is the best strategy there is. But in our modern world, that's a bit difficult, isn't it? You know, as I said, you just, walk along the roadside, you go jogging, you're going to breathe some lead dust from maybe 50 years ago when they used to put anti-knock lead in the gasoline. So anyway, it's something you need to be aware of, heavy metal toxicity, heavy metal overload. It's very important that we learn to get rid of it or minimize its inflammatory effects in our bodies. And trust me, it is, especially aluminium, a very powerful source of inflammation.